The Chinese president has called for efforts to bring calm to the war in Ukraine and talks with the European Council President Michel. It's a sign, really, that China may be trying to now address one of its biggest points of friction with Europe as the two leaders met in Beijing. Well, joining us now is Noah Barkin, managing editor at Rhodium Group's China practice. Thank you so much, Noah, for being with us today. There was, I guess, a question mark on how much China would like to get involved in trying to put pressure on Russia to stop what's happening in Ukraine. Where are we now?
Well, I think that's still a big question. We've seen maybe a sort of rhetorical shift from China starting at the beginning of this month when German Chancellor Olaf Scholz traveled to Beijing. China saying it doesn't want to see a nuclear escalation in Ukraine, but I think it's a question about whether China is actually going to put pressure on Putin and how much influence China has over Putin's actions.
And it's consequential, isn't it? Because arguably, if anyone can hold Putin back, it is going to be the Chinese President Xi Jinping. So we've had Olaf Scholz, then we have, of course, the European president in Beijing as well. And maybe they'll draw some lessons from the late 1980s when the US looked to that pivot with, of course, China versus the USSR. Do you think there's what are the opportunities here? How realistic is it that they can get Xi Jinping to move on this issue?
Well, I think nobody has the answer to that. I think what we are seeing is European leaders ramping up engagement with China. Of course, Xi Jinping was, during the lockdowns, was not meeting with foreign leaders. He is now meeting with them. Scholz visited him. He met a number of European leaders at the G20 summit in Bali. Now Michel is there today. I think we have some voices in Europe who are now saying we need China's economy to cushion ourselves against the economic blowback from the war in Ukraine, and we need to do everything we can to try to pry Beijing away from Moscow. Whether that will be successful in the end, I think, is an open question.
Noah, how would you describe at the moment the working relationship between Europe and China? What does China need from Europe, and what does Europe need from China?
Well, we've been through a period, a number of years, where the relationship between China and Europe has deteriorated pretty significantly over the China's support for Russia in the war in Ukraine, coercion against Lithuania, human rights issues. Right now, I think Europe is at a very crucial moment. As I said, re-engaging with China. At the same time, it has growing tensions with the United States. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, is in Washington today, and there are growing tensions over trade, over the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes sort of made in America tax credits, which the Europeans are very worried about, subsidies that could lure investors out of Europe into the U.S. So this is there's a lot of moving parts at the moment. We also have the protests in China. So a very interesting moment now for Europe-China relations, also for Europe-U.S. relations.